In 1527, Italian explorer Giovanni da Verrazzano was investigating some land that would later become part of New York, and he discovered in quotes, an island called Narioc. He returned to this island during his expeditions in 1529 before sailing back to Italy to tell the government what he had found. Narioc was later visited again by English explorer Henry Hudson. However, neither the English nor the Italians would set up a settlement near there. Instead, that honor belonged to the Dutch. Anthony Johnson van Salie, a Dutch settler, was the first person to own land near the island of Narioc, which would later be renamed Coney Island. My Dutch isn't very good, so forgive me if I butchered that pronunciation. And after he settled there in 1639, more Dutch arrived, and eventually in 1645 they bought a sizable chunk of land from Gowanus Creek all the way to Garretson Creek in what is today known as Brooklyn. And yes, this plot of land did include Coney Island, as well as another piece of land called Coney Hook. Again, I apologize for my Dutch. In 1644, 88 acres of land, including Coney Island and Coney Hook, were granted to a settler named Gisbert Opdyke. I think that's how you pronounce it. And in 1645, he created a small town known as Gravesend. East of Coney Hook, off the coast of Gravesend, was a island called Gisbert's Island. But Gisbert never lived in this town and instead sold it in 1661 to another Dutch settler named Dick de Wolf. These Dutch settlers had really unfortunate names. Anyway, Wolf banned the people of Gravesend from using Gisbert's Island, and instead he turned it into a salt works, which provoked outrage from the townsfolk who wanted to use it for livestock. Anyway, in 1664, Gravesend was transferred to the British, who created a new charter for the town. As a result of this trade, Coney Island was renamed to Coney Island, and it was excluded from Gravesend's new charter, as other islands that were excluded included Gisbert's Island and several smaller islands nearby. However, these were all made part of Gravesend again in 1685, when the town got another new charter. In 1734, a road was built from Gravesend to Coney Hook. I was trying to find a picture of a map from this time showing the road, but I couldn't find one online, so best I could do was a photo of New York City from this time. But if anyone does have any maps from that time period, I'm sure I would be very interested to see, and I'm sure others would too, so please share with the class. In 1750, a settler named Thomas Stillwell decided to dig a canal across Coney Hook, cutting it off from the mainland and turning it into an island called Pine Island. And this canal would connect New York Harbor with Jamaica Bay. Now, after Pine Island was created, nothing really happened because there were lots of wars, including, of course, the Revolutionary War, and the War of 1812. But before the War of 1812, and after the Revolutionary War, Pine Island and Coney Island, which were at the time two separate pieces of land, were combined into one island. Then, after the War of 1812, people decided that they wanted to turn this new island into a resort. In 1824, a bridge was built over the canal, which connected the mainland of New York City with Coney Island, so people can now easily get to the island without having to take a boat, which was very convenient. A road was also constructed to allow people who crossed the bridge onto the island, and this road was called Shell Road. Shell Road, interestingly enough, still exists to this very day. 5 years later, in 1829, the island received its first hotel. When it opened, it was known as the Coney Island House, but it got a name change in 1930 and became the Oceanic Hotel. This hotel stayed standing until the 1940s when it was torn down. Throughout the 1830s and 40s, more roads were added to Coney Island to make it easier to get around for carriages, but the real breakthrough and real guests started coming in 1847 when a ferry line was created between Manhattan and Coney Island. And transit to Coney Island became even easier in 1864 when the first train station on the island was opened and a train line was constructed. This train line was fully finished and operational by 1867, which is perfect because the next year, in 1868, another hotel opened on the island. This hotel was located in an area called Brighton Beach. In 1875, two major things happened. First, there was the opening of the Cable Hotel, yet another hotel on the island, and the Culver Line was added, creating more rail access and streetcar access for people to get between Brooklyn and the island. 1876, in addition to being America's 100th anniversary, brought another hotel to Coney Island, as well as the Iron Tower, a 300-foot tall structure that was originally constructed in Philadelphia for the centennial celebration before being bought by the owner of the Culver Line as an attraction for the island. But the Iron Tower and the hotel weren't the only things the island got that year, as a carousel was also constructed, marking the first amusement ride at this new tourist destination. From 1877 to around 1883 was a time of growth for Coney Island, with more hotels and restaurants and carousels popping up, but I'm going to fast forward through all those times because I want to get to 1884, where something very exciting happened that changed the entertainment industry in a huge way. On June 16th of that year, American inventor LaMarcus Thompson debuted his magnum opus on a large plot of land in Coney Island. This was called Switchback Railway, and it was, for all intents and purposes, the world's first roller coaster. This was a wooden roller coaster with a height of 50 feet, a first drop of 43 feet, top speed of 60 miles per hour, an angle of descent of 30 degrees, and about 600 feet of track. Now, because this was the first roller coaster, there were some minor differences, such as the lack of a lift hill and the fact that the ride employee would have to push you to get you going down the drop, since the station was at the highest point of the ride. Later on, roller coasters would get a chain lift, but that wasn't until the 1900s. The Switchback Railway also served as a catalyst to welcome some more whimsical offerings to the resort, such as the Elephantine Colossus, an elephant-shaped hotel that opened in 1885, and horse racing tracks, which opened in 1890. Now, all these things drew in guests, but the Switchback Railway was by far the biggest draw, and the main effect it had that was possibly the most influential for Coney Island was that it opened the door for amusement parks to start to open in the resort. The first amusement park to open on the island was Sea Lion Park, which debuted in 1895. This park featured a waters ride and a diving show, but perhaps its most notable addition was Flip Flap Railway, the first inverting roller coaster. The next amusement park to open would be Steeplechase Park in 1897, and this park advertised itself as having 53 different attractions, including a House of Horrors, or as we would call it today, a year-round haunted house. But its most popular attraction was the titular Steeplechase, a racing roller coaster that could handle up to 12 riders at a time on its 6 separate tracks. Sea Lion Park closed in 1902 and was promptly taken over by 2 business partners named Frederick Thompson and Elmer Dundee. Thompson and Dundee got into the entertainment industry in 1901 when they built a dark ride called A Trip to the Moon for the Buffalo Pan American Exposition. Once the exposition was over, they brought their dark ride to Coney Island, where they opened it at Steeplechase Park for the 1902 season, before closing it after a disagreement with Steeplechase Park's owner, George Tillieu. Once they closed it, they decided to open their own amusement park with this ride as their flagship attraction. So they wound up buying, as I mentioned before, Sea Lion Park and the site of the Elephantine Colossus, which had burnt down in 1896. They placed A Trip to the Moon in the former location of the Elephantine Colossus and renamed Sea Lion Park to Luna Park. After a series of unfortunate construction delays and frustrations, including the death of Topsy the elephant, which I won't talk about here, but if you're really curious, you could probably find it online, Luna Park finally opened to the public in May 16th, 1903, where attractions included A Trip to the Moon, as well as a Shoot the Chutes flume ride, a 3-ring circus, and a tower with over 38,000 electrical lights. A third amusement park opened on May 15th, 1904. This amusement park was named Dreamland, and it was created by former New York State Senator William H. Reynolds. Now, when Reynolds created this park, he wanted it to be a direct competitor to Luna Park. So many of the attractions there were basically the rip-offs of Luna Park's rides and attractions. One unique opening day attraction for Dreamland, however, would be a wooden roller coaster, which is enclosed in a building and called Coasting Through Switzerland. This was basically the first indoor roller coaster, and it was a wooden roller coaster because steel coasters hadn't been created yet at this time. And all three of these competing amusement parks would add roller coasters over the course of the 1900s and into the 1910s. Steeplechase Park got a figure-8 roller coaster in 1908, while Luna Park got the Tickler, a wooden Wild Mouse coaster, which also debuted in 1908. Now, this competition between amusement parks was brought to a screeching halt in 1911 when Dreamland got completely obliterated in a tragic fire. And this also kind of brought the amusement park industry in the region to a halt. And also, tourism was dwindling around this time because they got rid of horse racing in 1909, so now there wasn't as much of a draw. But that meant that there were opportunities for other entertainment and amenities like food. And eventually, like the legend of the Phoenix, Coney Island came back from that fire and dwindling attendance stronger, managing to recover thanks to a multitude of factors, including the opening of a hot dog stand in 1916, which you may or may not have heard of, but you probably have. It's called Nathan's. And with this resurgence in attendance, the amusement parks were able to make a comeback too. And as they entered the 1920s, they were about to be bigger and better. And there was no better showcase of that than the roller coasters that were about to emerge. In 1920, the Wonder Wheel opened. This was pretty similar to a normal Ferris wheel with one major exception. The cabins would move side to side, so some of them would slide in towards the center, then out towards the edge of the circle, while others remained stationary. This was followed by the construction of the Regalman Boardwalk in 1923, and the Shore Theater joined Coney Island's lineup in 1925. Also in 1925, a brand new roller coaster was added. This was a wooden roller coaster called Thunderbolt. It was designed by John Miller, stood 86 feet high, had a runtime of 1 minute 17 seconds overall, and fit into a very thin plot of land. Think the plot of land hang time at Knott's Berry Farm sits in, and that should give you an idea of how little space they had to work with, which made the fact that they were able to fit this in even more impressive. This was followed up in 1926 by Tornado, another wooden roller coaster designed by some of the best designers of the era, including Fred Church and LaMarcus Thompson. This coaster stood at 71 feet tall and had a length of nearly 3,000 feet. Now, both of these roller coasters were quite impressive to visitors and locals at Coney Island. However, they would pale in comparison to what arrived in 1927. That year saw the debut of what is perhaps the most iconic roller coaster on Earth, and the first ride that pops into your mind when you think of the word roller coaster. This is the Cyclone. This ride was designed by Vernon Keenan, and it was a wooden coaster like all the others, only instead of wood supports, it had steel supports, making it technically the world's first hybrid coaster. Cyclone currently stands at a height of 75 feet, has an angle of descent, aka the angle of the first drop, at 58 degrees, hits 60 miles per hour, and has just over 2,800 feet of track. And unlike Tornado and Thunderbolt, which were both torn down, something we'll get to later, Cyclone remains standing to this day and is considered a New York City landmark, which is a testament to how historic it is and the impact it had on Coney Island. And these roller coasters, as well as other amusement rides that were installed earlier in the 20s, kept Coney Island's tourism industry going strong even through the beginning of the Great Depression. However, these good times were not going to last long, as later in the 30s, Coney Island did stumble into a bit more trouble, thanks to one particular New York City official. In 1934, New York City got a new parks commissioner named Robert Moses, and by the time he was finished in the 1960s, he was known as the man who rebuilt New York. And he started his plans early in 1937 when he debuted a whole new redevelopment plan for Coney Island. And as part of his redevelopment plan for Coney Island, New York City bought some land along the shore of the island and moved the boardwalk further inland. For the first few years under Robert Moses, Coney Island's tourism industry was booming, continuing on the success it got in the 20s, and the island was always packed with visitors. However, in the early 1940s, this attendance took a hit due to two factors. First, of course, was the Second World War that was going on. And second, in 1944, Luna Park was completely destroyed by a fire. And 2 years later, in 1946, Robert Moses sold the land formerly occupied by the amusement park to a company that wanted to build Quonset huts. Now, 1946 wasn't all bad for the amusement industry in the area, as two new rides were added to Coney Island. However, Robert Moses wanted to focus more on parks and redeveloping the area so it was more residential focused and less about entertainment and amusements. So, in 1949, Moses had the former site of Luna Park transferred from this company to the New York's Park Department for rezoning into a residential area, and he also announced plans to demolish about a third of the Coney Island amusement district to make way for more residential housing. However, this plan was met by fierce backlash and was eventually scrapped. One plan that wasn't scrapped, however, was the Steeplechase Pier revitalization, which was completed in 1950. Now, Moses wouldn't create any other big projects on the island, which is now more of a peninsula, until 1954, when construction began on a new location for the New York Aquarium. This aquarium opened in 1957, and Bob Moses hoped that this new addition would revitalize the Coney Island tourism industry, which it did, at least for a few years, until something else came around in the 1960s.
Part of the fun of the World's Fair is the Subway special that takes you there.
There's a good time feeling in the air.
On the Subway special to the World's Fair. Trains are easy to catch anywhere,
Anytime, night or day.
Just pay 15 cents,
Hop aboard!
and you're on your way. Yes, part of the fun of the World's Fair
Is the Subway special?
that takes you there.
Your transit authority has 430 spanking new picture window cars for the elevated ride to the World's Fair. Express trains start at Times Square and Grand Central, and you're safely at the fair in less than 20 minutes. Take it easy. Take the subway.
Yes, part of the fun of the World's Fair
Is the Subway special?
that takes you there.
The 1964 World's Fair took place in New York City in a park called Flushing Meadows, which was pretty far away from Coney Island and drove tourism away from the amusement parks of that area. And this was especially damaging for Steeplechase Park, which closed permanently at the end of that year, and Robert Moses promptly sold the park to a developer who's from a pretty controversial family. In fact, this person is so controversial, I am going to put a disclaimer here before we move on to our next segment. So, here goes. This next segment of the video focuses on a public official who people have strong opinions on, and if you're uncomfortable with hearing about this person, please skip ahead to the segment after this one. Also, if you are one of the people who is strongly opinionated on this figure, please do not mention anything political about them in the comments, as I am trying to keep this video and the segment mainly objective, and I don't want anyone starting fights down in the comments, as it's a place for everyone. Thank you for your understanding. Okay, now, with that out of the way, let's dive right into it. The land that Steeplechase Park formerly occupied was purchased by real estate developer Fred Trump, who is the father of current President of the United States, Donald Trump. And Fred, rather than wanting to rebuild an amusement park, decided that this land would be perfect for apartments and housing. So he built Trump Village, a 7-story apartment building on the former site of Culver Depot, which had been torn down years prior to make room for new housing. This apartment building was built as part of a housing boom in that time period where developers raced to build as many apartments as possible in Coney Island. Other apartments that popped up during this time included the Warbassy houses and the Luna Park apartments that were right near the cyclone. And these apartments were in very high demand. You see, in 1961, Coney Island housed about 31,000 people. But by the time the housing boom ended in 1966, the population of the island had more than doubled to 100,000 people. Yet Trump still wasn't satisfied with the number of apartments. And so, in 1966, he demolished the Pavilion of Fun at Steeplechase Park so that he could use all the land to build more condos. And his plan for the former Pavilion of Fun site was a 100-plus foot indoor dome containing a shopping center and different recreational activities. Now, this did have the approval of the Brooklyn president at the time, but it also angered the aldermen of New York City, who in 1968 planned to replace Steeplechase Park with a state park, and they attempted to buy the land from Fred Trump, which led to a series of long legal battles from the late 60s into the early 70s. And during this time, Fred Trump was leasing the land to another showman who was running some flat rides there. I couldn't really find any images of the land during this time, so this is the closest I could find what remains of Steeplechase Park. And eventually they did evict Fred Trump from the land. However, by this point, Coney Island was slowly declining in popularity again, and they needed a new way to revitalize the area and bring guests back. They had multiple attempts over the 70s and 80s, but none successful, which brings us into the 1990s, and another controversial figure is stepping up to try to breathe new life into Coney Island. So once again, please refer to the disclaimer I placed before this section, and we can dive into the next section of this video. In 1988, the Coney Island cyclone had become iconic enough to be labeled a New York City landmark due to its historical significance to the area and its popularity with guests and locals alike. And in 1989, two more Coney Island attractions got landmark status. These were the Parachute Jump and the Wonder Wheel. In addition, the residential areas of Coney Island were starting to improve, with crime dropping throughout the late 80s and early 90s. So now the area looked inviting and ready for a revitalization. And in 1994, a new mayor had a plan for the land formerly occupied by Steeplechase Park that would reinvigorate the island. The name of this new mayor was Rudy Giuliani, and his plan was the Sportsplex. This was meant to be a $67 million investment, which, as its name suggested, was a complex housing areas for different sports, including basketball and baseball, because at the time, Giuliani had dreams of bringing a professional MLB team to the Brooklyn area, and he thought Coney Island would be a great place for a stadium. However, in 1998, he canceled the Sportsplex plans in favor of something more realistic. In 2000, construction began on Giuliani's dream baseball park. This was Maimonides Park, known back then as Keystone Park, and it's home to the Brooklyn Cyclones team, which is a minor league baseball team. Now, this was pretty much the most major thing Giuliani did, as he left office in 2001 and was replaced by Michael Bloomberg, who decided to sell the park and Coney Island to a new developer. After the major rezoning of the entire Coney Island Peninsula that took place in the early 2000s and included the creation of a entertainment and amusement district and several failed plans for redevelopment, including some more casino and theme park proposals, a brand new amusement park finally opened on the peninsula in 2010, and this park bared the name of a previous park, Luna Park. This park opened with 2 roller coasters, the smallest of which was Circus Coaster, a Zamperla speedy coaster with a height of 29 feet, a top speed of 18 miles per hour, and a track length of just 574 feet. However, it would complete its course twice. The bigger of the 2 coasters opening that year was the Tickler, another Zamperla, and this was a spinning wild mouse model similar to Raging Cajun or the now defunct Primeval Earl. Luna Park also featured a collection of flat rides from Zamperla, who bought the property from a real estate company in 2009. Steeplechase made its debut in 2011, with the name being an homage to the departed Steeplechase Park. This was a Zamperla Moto Coaster, which is a launch coaster where you ride as if you were straddling a motorcycle, that had a height of 42 feet and reaches a top speed of 37 miles per hour. It's a pretty short but sweet layout, and by far the most interesting thing about this ride are the trains, which are shaped like horses. Also debuting in 2011 was the first inverting coaster at Coney Island since 1895. This is Soarin' Eagle, a relocated Zamperla Volare with a top height of 50 feet, a top speed of 25 miles an hour, and 2 inversions, both of which are Heartline rolls. This is unique because it's one of the only flying roller coasters in New York, although flying might be a bit of a stretch since it's really more laying on your stomach in a cage. So really you should only ride this for the uniqueness factor and then probably move on to a better ride, like the one that was debuted in 2014. Thunderbolt is by far the tallest roller coaster at the park, and while it may not have gotten the best reviews upon its debut 11 years ago, I think people are starting to warm up to it. With a vertical lift taking up 114 feet, a vertical drop, a top speed of 55 miles per hour, and 4 inversions, this roller coaster is by far the most thrilling on the peninsula, and I feel roller coaster enthusiasts should come ride this. At least give it a chance. Don't let what they've heard about it scare them away. For a while, it seemed like Luna Park was the only Coney Island park receiving new additions and roller coasters, but in 2021, Dino's Wonder Wheel Park finally got a major coaster with the addition of Phoenix, a Vekoma suspended family coaster, notably the first steel coaster not to be built by Zamperla in the modern era. This had a top height of 68 feet and reaches a top speed of 34 miles per hour. And what is unique about this ride is that it goes around twice. Most Vekoma suspended family coasters only go around once. So this is a fun ride for kids and people who aren't quite ready for the big rides. Dino's Wonder Wheel Park also got a kiddie coaster that year called Sky Flyer, a small SBF Visa with a length of only 91 feet. And to round out the more modern coasters, in 2022, Luna Park got Tony's Express, a Zamperla Junior coaster with a height of 49 feet and a top speed of 26 miles per hour. So all in all, it's a pretty good lineup of roller coasters and other rides across these two amusement parks, and of course, the fact that the cyclone is still standing to this day helps a lot. Now, let's talk about Coney Island's ambiance overall. My most recent visit to Coney Island was in August 2025, and I noticed there that a lot of people were coming into the parks. Several of them were riding on the Cyclone, and several of them were over by Dino's Wonder Wheel Park. I also noticed that the atmosphere in the park seemed a lot more festive than usual, and I was there at dusk, so everything was all lit up. The rides were all going, which was nice to see since there were a lot of crowds everywhere. That's another thing you'll notice in this footage. Once I get into the park, you'll see exactly how crowded it was. So people were coming from every direction. And some of the rides I noticed were less popular than others, like this Music Express here. I noticed no one was really on it, hence why there's just a bunch of empty cabins. So I do wonder what's up with that. But another thing you'll see is that one of the most popular attractions today was the Haunted Dark Ride, which I didn't even realize Coney Island had. There was also a really cool exhibit here showing an old ride vehicle from an amusement park called Astroland, which opened in 1962 and was closed in 2009. Astroland was the park that was here before Luna Park, and this ride vehicle was for a ride called the Moon Rocket, which, as its name suggests, was about a trip to the moon. As you can see here, they had signs explaining the whole amusement park and saying it was themed to space. They also discussed the dismantling of the ride and the closure of Astroland. Fun fact about this Astroland rocket, actually, it used to be on top of one of the local restaurants before it was moved here by the family that owns Luna Park. So yeah, I found this a really fun little piece of local history that I didn't know about until I visited. As we head to the back of this park, which is Dino's Wonder Wheel Park, you will notice that the ambiance gets a little spookier and you start to see more scary stuff. So over there is Phoenix, and over here we have a dark ride where you go in and you shoot zombie clowns. This is all leading to the very back of the park where it's at its most crowded, and back there they have another rather scary ride, an old ghost train, which you will see now. Here is the back of Dino's Wonder Wheel Park. And as you can see, there are lots of people gathered here by Spookorama, which is, as I said, their old ghost train type dark ride. And right in front of us is the Wonder Wheel, but this whole section of the park is themed around the Spookorama. So there's a shooting game over there called Ghost Hunter, where you can see some old haunted house tricks like drop down windows and animatronics. I thought this skeleton was really neat. I also like the rest in peace sign. Here lies our ticket seller Dick, whose last words were, "I told you I was sick." Little bit of humor there for anyone who has worked at a customer service heavy industry like an amusement park or, say, a fast food restaurant. So I think everyone can appreciate that. And there's Ghost Hunter, and there's the Phoenix again. I really like this lighting package. It's very pretty, especially with the sun going down. Now, as we leave Dino's Wonder Wheel and enter Luna Park a little later at night, you will see that there are a lot more people here. And you'll also see, as you enter to your left, Steeplechase, which, if I might add, is very, very loud. Like, I had to shout to be heard over this ride in the vlog, which is coming soon. You'll see it as soon as I release this video. So yeah, fun ride, but way too loud in my opinion. Now this is the part of the park that's in danger of being removed, and I will get to that in a bit, but before I do, know that with the exception of Soaring Eagle, I really like everything in this park, and the ambience, I would say, is spectacular. Like, you're in an amusement park, you know that, but it also feels quite nostalgic, like you're in a much better time. Now, let's talk about why this part of the park in particular is in danger of being removed. Recently, a casino was proposed for Coney Island, and this casino would be called the Coney, and it would fit in a chunk of land that includes the area currently occupied by Steeplechase, Soaring Eagle, and various other rides. Now, the residents of Coney Island are not too happy about this casino proposal, saying it would bring in crime and hurt local businesses. And, they do have a point. However, I'm not happy about this casino for another reason. It would erase part of New York's history. As you've seen from earlier in this video, Coney Island has a very vibrant past from its founding in the early 1700s up to today. And while it has had some rocky parts of its history, it's also had some major successes that deserve to be celebrated and preserved, and a casino would just get rid of most of what makes Coney Island special. Plus, there were other proposals for casinos earlier in the history, like back in the early 2000s, even in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Casinos were always proposed and they never seemed to work out here. So, I don't think this casino would work out either. And even if it is built, I don't see it lasting long. So, what can be done to stop the construction of this casino? For those of you living in Brooklyn who don't want to see this casino get built, I recommend you go to a New York City Council meeting and let them know. They do allow time for public comment on projects, so you can go and say to them you oppose the Coney Casino and explain your reasons why, whether that be you're worried about crime, worried about business, concerned how it would impact the quality of living, or you care about the history. I'm sure they would love to hear from you about why you think the casino's bad, and who knows, maybe they'll take your points into consideration. If you're anxious about speaking in public, or if you're worried you might not have enough time to explain your concerns fully at a meeting, you could also write a letter to your alderman explaining why you're opposed to the casino. Just make sure it's respectful and addresses them by their title. If you're outside of New York City, there are other things you can do to help stop the construction of this casino. For example, there are various petitions online that you can sign to show your support and solidarity with the people of Coney Island who want to protect their quality of life and the history of the area. And most importantly, spread the word about what's going on through social media. You could use Twitter, you could show YouTube videos. In fact, by watching this, you've already spread awareness about the trouble that's happening in Coney Island, and I would like to thank you so much for watching, and if you liked this video, please share it with everyone you know so that more people are aware of the rich history of this area and understand why this casino is bad. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you next time with another new video. Bye!